behalf of all of us at the Graduate School of Business, it's my great pleasure to welcome back a wonderful group of alumni, many staff here, corporate friends, all of our students to this terrific annual WIM Banquet. On the back of your program are all of the people who've been very supportive in terms of the student leadership, the staff leadership, corporate support, and I simply commend to you their names, and I hope you give them your thanks and recognition at some point during the evening and after this evening. Michelle and Elisa, I congratulate you as the co-chairs of the banquet and all of the people on your committee for not only putting together tonight's wonderful banquet, it must be almost a record-setting crowd in terms of attendance, but also for all the contributions that the WIM organization makes to enrich our life at the GSB throughout the school year. It's a very exciting time at Stanford, of course. Many of you hear me talk about that. The university is in the process, I think, of really redefining the role of a great university in modern society, how much we ought to be seeking solutions to big problems as we also educate leaders. And within a great university, the role of a great business school, as we try to really redefine what management education in the 21st century is about in preparing leaders for the times ahead. If you think about a university that's seeking solutions and educating leaders, it's impossible to imagine that a business school is not right in the heart of that. And I think that is what's so exciting about Stanford, is the role we play within this great university. Many of you know we're in the midst of 3 C's we're trying to put in place, and in fact we're much of the year through a new curriculum that's really typified by being more personalized, more individually challenging, much more about leadership and communication and developing a leadership culture at the GSB, and about global, the fact that we live in such a small, interdependent world today. It's also about new collaborations across Stanford and exciting new projects and interactions with other grad students at this university. And ultimately, of course, it's about a new campus, which will be right across the street from the Schwab Center here. And we plan to break ground this summer on an extraordinary new environment, which will really allow us to bring this academic vision to life. I guess this spring has been my time for introducing outstanding women leaders among our Stanford alumni population. It was just last month in New York that I had the podium and was the person introducing our honoree for the GSB Excellence in Leadership Award, which was, I'm proud to say, Michelle Clayman, who's with us tonight. And now this month I get to introduce another outstanding GSB alumni. She actually was at my table, I think, as I recall, in New York as we honored Michelle. Debbie Zoullas, Debbie Dakota Zoullas, is somebody I've known for a long time because of her engagement with the business school. She started life here coming to us first after having gotten her bachelor's degree at Smith College. Tells you something about Debbie right away when you realize that she was a math major. She then was an analyst at Morgan Stanley for a couple years and then made her way out west to the GSB. And after graduating from the great class of 1978, and some of Debbie's classmates are here tonight at the table, she went back to Morgan Stanley for the next 18 years. So all in all, a 20-year, very distinguished career at that very distinguished firm, increasingly responsible positions. And after a 20-year career, that sounds very short to somebody like me, but she retired. That's the great thing about finance sometimes. You can retire after 20 years. She retired from Morgan Stanley, but they didn't want to lose her. They kept her as an advisory director, as she still is, and she had a brief respite and then took on a very interesting assignment at Sotheby's. You know, I had a director once of one of the banks I was involved in. He used to describe really trying times and very difficult things. He'd say, well, Bob, that's a character building experience. And you know, in some ways he was really right. And Debbie had one of these character-building experiences, I think, in terms of the leadership times at Sotheby's. And after doing some pretty amazing work for the better part of 2 years, she retired from that. And in the year 2000, she couldn't stop herself. She became an entrepreneur. She founded an interesting company called La Loupe. Some of you may know La Loupe. And it was a startup luxury goods venture that's going strong today. In terms of the business school, she's been on our GSB Trust for 6 years and chaired the trust for a while. This is the group that looks after an important part of our endowment, people from the money management industry. Some of our other trust members are here tonight, such as Ann Cassels. And now she's also had a long service on our GSB Advisory Council, our very important group that comes together twice a year. They actually start meeting here tomorrow and are of great, great help, I tell you, to the dean in terms of the future direction strategy of the business school. She and her husband Nick live in Manhattan. They can't help themselves. These people are so adventurous and entrepreneurial. Even in their sort of hobby time, they happen to produce prize-winning olive oil and fine Italian wine. They're a pretty amazing couple. So please, will you join me in welcoming our keynote speaker tonight, Debbie Zoullas.
Thank you, Bob, for that introduction. And thank you, WIM, for inviting me to speak with you tonight. Since the theme of the conference this weekend for all of you is change, I thought I'd share with you my thoughts about how much has changed for women in management in the past 30 years since I graduated from the GSB, and how that change informs the opportunities and the challenges for all of us in the future. In 1976, my first year MBA class had 73 women in it, which was 23% of the class. In fact, 2 of them are here with us tonight, my friends Amy Youngquist and Betsy Rowland. Thank you both for being here. In 2008, the first-year MBA class had 138 women, which is 38% of the class. Now, that's almost double, a really dramatic change in terms of absolute numbers. But the rate of change, I think we'd all agree, has been a little disappointing. And similarly, during this period, there's also been a dramatic change in the evolution of the guy-girl dynamic in corporate America. But I believe that the rate of progress in balancing the dynamic has been way too slow, and I think there's a lot that can be done to speed it up. To provide some historical perspective about what has changed, let me relate a couple of standout memories from the dark ages of 1974, the year I graduated from college. In the spring of my senior year, I was thrilled to get a very interesting interview with the First Chicago Bank in Chicago for the First Scholars Program. It was a very competitive program, and it offered a side-by-side executive MBA from the University of Chicago. That sounded interesting to me at the time, so off I went to Chicago for the interviews. The bank was putting me up at the very impressive Union League Club. As I entered the club through the front door, I was told that I wasn't allowed to enter the club through the front door. There was a ladies' entrance around the corner. It was a dark corner, too. I was also told that I was not allowed, remember this was 1974, to eat alone in the dining rooms. They would send me room service. As you can appreciate, coming from a women's college, I was not at all prepared to be confronted with gender restrictions on my physical movements. Instead, I ended up going to work at Morgan Stanley as one of the first analysts in a 2-year pre-business school track. 1974, interestingly, was also the first year that Morgan Stanley hired a woman MBA. And I think it would be fair to say that the early times were a learning experience for us and for the firm. I can actually remember the discussions surrounding the appropriateness of a woman, me in this instance, going on a business trip with her male boss. In the end, since it was a day trip, the decision was made I could go. Can you imagine? This was only 34 years ago. Actually, the work was great fun, the learning curve very steep, and the environment exciting. After 2 years, I was off to Stanford to get my MBA. When I returned to Morgan Stanley, I was one of 10 new MBAs, and to my surprise, 50% were women. It seemed that hiring women MBAs at Morgan Stanley was proceeding nicely. But integrating them into the alpha male culture of Wall Street at the time would prove difficult. For despite the 50% mix, there wasn't a day in the first 15 years of my career when I didn't feel I was a distinct minority, something now referred to in psychological research as the minority effect. At first, this minority status manifested itself in small, seemingly superficial ways. The president of the firm might pause to have me exit an elevator in front of him while normally the junior associates were always bringing up the rear. Or the senior partner of my team would offer to carry my black bags full of documents on a business trip, where normally this was a job reserved for the most junior folks. Small embarrassments of no real consequence, but they did draw attention to us as being different at a time when we were all working very hard just to be considered the same. To an absurd degree, some women were even wearing bow ties to work in those early days, thinking maybe looking the same would help. These small differences in the way minorities are treated are now called micro-inequities. And as it turns out, and little did we know at the time, these micro-inequities in aggregate do have negative consequences. They serve to create a feeling of isolation on the part of the minority and undermine their sense of commitment to the job. Not exactly a recipe for success. Well, the firm was growing quickly through the 1980s. Teams of experienced salesmen and traders were hired, and the vast majority were male. As for the women, although their careers started out with great promise, they were falling off the fast track as they progressed beyond entry-level positions. Women were assigned to the smaller client teams, working with the less influential partners. They weren't selected to work on the high-profile teams with the most important clients. An implicit bias seemed to be at work. We didn't know what to call it then, but we could certainly sense that it was operational. As women worked their way through their careers, they were frequently frustrated with their lack of advancement. Along the way, many decided to leave. Their job satisfaction and the financial reward were not commensurate with the time and effort that they were putting into their work. Well, not all of us left. A few of us managed to persevere, working in various divisions sprinkled around the firm. Eventually, we succeeded in poking a few holes in the glass ceiling. In 1987, the first women partners were made at the firm, and every year after, a few more women MDs were added. A very significant milestone, certainly, but the journey was far from over. For although women had achieved equal status, their actual job responsibilities were not on par with their male colleagues, and as a result, their professional development was not keeping pace. This phenomenon now has a proper name. It's called becoming de-skilled. Senior women tended to be given jobs with very impressive-sounding titles, but they were all non-revenue-generating administrative jobs. They became heads of human resources, operations, and corporate communications. If they worked on the sales and trading side of the business, they were more likely to be trading the T-bill than the riskier and more lucrative long bond. And of course, since promotions up to senior management levels were all dependent on one's ability to generate revenue, women were not exactly crashing through that portion of the glass ceiling. It didn't take long for their frustration level to build up, and inevitably, many talented women partners departed the firm. In 1994, the firm recognized the trend and asked me to undertake a review of the progress of women at Morgan Stanley. I was very skeptical at first. I felt I'd worked very hard to achieve my position and hadn't really felt my personal career experience had been impacted by my gender. I don't know what planet I was on. I was really wrong. Maybe I was in denial, I don't know. Anyhow, after a lot of careful and thorough analysis, the conclusions of the study, which I did undertake, were obvious. Women were not faring anywhere nearly as well as men at every level of the organization and within all ability grades. As you might imagine, senior management had difficulty at first internalizing the problem. They had a very strong sense that the firm functioned as a true meritocracy, and that meant that the most highly talented professionals were rewarded. But as they were presented with the full report, it became quite obvious that there were some intangible biases lurking below the surface throughout the firm, which were limiting the perceived performance of women. There was a gender divide. While we were able to identify some tangible issues related to family balance, we were really struggling to address the core of the problem. Why was it that women could be top achievers in the early stages of their careers and yet not end up as serious contenders for the top management jobs? I think we were struggling because the concept of implicit bias had not yet been validated in the world of scientific psychology. Our alpha male culture was yet to learn that implicit biases exist and that they would need to be addressed if the playing field of our meritocracy were to be leveled. In the course of collecting the information for the study, I met with women of all levels of the firm and found a very significant difference in attitude regarding women's issues between the most senior women and the more junior women. When I met with the managing directors, the real pioneers of Wall Street at that time, there was a strong resistance to the notion that a woman's problem existed at all. There was very little enthusiasm to be helpful, a strong sense that they had succeeded without anyone's help, and others could do the same, that somehow providing help to younger women professionals would diminish what these pioneers had accomplished. As disappointing as this was, I think it's important to remember the context. There were so few women in the early days. We can start there. There were no friendships among these women because they didn't know each other. This was a generation of women who were making their careers at a time when sexual harassment was a new workplace problem. Gender sensitivity and politically correct behavior were being taught. And against this background, male resentment was building. The gender divide had by this time become very real and was a very negative influence in the career progress of women. It is no wonder that these pioneers were so wary and felt so disconnected. Talk about the negative consequences of the minority effect. But interestingly, I didn't observe the same wariness and disconnectedness when I met with the junior women officers. First of all, there were more of them, and many more of them had already met each other in various firm-wide training and orientation sessions. Many were even working with women colleagues. We would have dinners with maybe 10 or 15 junior officers during the study phase, and at those dinners, humor was exchanged. They were counseling each other's careers. They were sharing problems, frustrations with their bosses. It was an extremely positive dynamic of a women's network which had begun to take root. There was real power in numbers. Well, that's enough of the dark ages. Many things have changed since those days. The demographics have clearly worked in our favor. The number of women at every level of every organization has grown dramatically as the economy has grown. And importantly, their bosses have changed. Women are now working with and reporting to men and women who've grown up in a different era. This generation of managers has interacted with impressive women as friends and classmates. This world has seen women as heads of state, secretaries of state, Supreme Court justices, and even a very serious White House contender. So accepting women as colleagues and managers is more comfortable for them than it was for the previous generation of managers. The psychological research surrounding the issues of managing gender diversity in the workplace have also been developing rapidly. We are now at a point where many of the issues of gender differences in communication, management, and leadership styles have been identified. And with this new understanding, metrics are being developed to evaluate performance and aptitude along gender-sensitive dimensions. There's a growing understanding and acceptance that a business needs men and women to maximize the effectiveness of the enterprise. London School of Economics has recently published a research study which concludes that a corporation's innovation capacity is highest in teams where the gender mix is 50% men and 50% women. This is very powerful. This is the kind of research which takes dead aim at those elusive, intangible, and so destructive implicit gender biases. We now understand that leadership styles can vary between the sexes. A command and control style may be more agreeably received when coming from a man, while an interactive leadership style might work better for women. And most importantly, corporations are realizing that both styles of management are effective. Now, I'm not suggesting that the mission of eradicating the gender divide has been accomplished by any means. I wish I could say it had been. Real progress has been made, but the rate of progress has been far too slow. A recent study by the Catalyst Group reports that the overall number of women in top executive jobs has barely budged in recent years. Women hold about 16% of Fortune 500 officer-level jobs, and that's only increased 1% in the last 5 years. And similarly, women comprise only 16% of corporate directors. More change is certainly necessary, and it will take a lot of work to accomplish. For the company's part, the next important challenge will be to operationalize the removal of the gender divide. Line managers need to be made responsible and accountable for working implicit gender biases out of the culture. This is an initiative that has to begin at the CEO and board level. And with the continuing growth in research, which connects a gender-balanced workforce to improve shareholder returns, I suspect we'll see some progress on this front. But the rest is really up to us. When I say us, sorry guys, I mean the women in the room. We have to make the most out of this improving corporate culture. We have to recognize that corporations are really social organisms, groups of men and women working together in a competitive environment. If we're going to be successful within these companies, we must focus on developing some critical skills and altering some of our female behavioral norms. We have to change our tendency of putting our heads down and assuming if we work hard, we'll be recognized and we'll succeed. Working hard is simply just not enough. Throughout my career, the men who reported to me were always in my face. They were always telling me the amazing business they'd accomplished and how highly talented they were. Wasn't I lucky to have them work for me? But the women who reported to me were a completely different story. I'd have to seek them out. I'd have to sit them down and ask them what they were doing. We need to get comfortable telling our bosses that we're doing great things if we want them to believe it. It's that simple. Each of us has to find her own way to brag to our manager and not have this be interpreted as being overly aggressive. We must learn to walk the fine line of knowing how to manage these subtleties but get the message through constructively. We have to manage our careers more actively. Get feedback. The best way to understand how we need to improve our performance is to ask for feedback. The problem is, getting and receiving feedback is difficult for all involved. Research suggests that women are especially loath to ask for and accept feedback. And while we're at it, let's acknowledge that managers are likely to be uncomfortable giving women employees feedback for fear of upsetting them. We need to get over it. We need to push ourselves to push our bosses to get beyond that and give us the information each one of us needs to course correct and be more successful. Focus on developing relationships with the people we work with. We all need to be building personal relationships with our managers. Stick around for the small talk, ladies. Let's be more open about our lives and about our families. Our managers need to understand us as people in order to trust us, and we have to help him or her to do that. Be proactive. We need to put ourselves out there and be willing to ask for and negotiate for a job we want, a promotion we deserve, a raise we feel is due. We are notoriously bad at doing this, we women. Now, it won't be as simple as ask and you shall receive, but in many cases, it really is as simple as if you don't ask, you won't receive. So we need to start asking for what we feel we deserve and then negotiating when we don't get the answer we want. Resist becoming de-skilled. We need to keep our telescopes up, look around, and see the bigger picture. Ask ourselves if our professional development will keep pace if we accept the new job being offered. And if the answer is no, avoid the trap. We need to handle career disappointments carefully. Every career, no matter how successful it once was or will be in the future, has had to deal with disappointments. We need to cope with these career dead spots carefully because our managers and our coworkers will certainly be watching. And we can't assume that we'll be perfectly stuck in a dead spot. You need to take a long-term view of our careers and pace ourselves. And really importantly, find mentors. As we navigate our careers, mentors can be a really great source of advice and support. So we need to focus on developing relationships with senior people who can be our mentors, men and women throughout the organization who are well-positioned to be helpful. And I think finally, the most important thing for all of us is to develop, and you all certainly in this room know it already, to develop a personal network of women. Throughout your career, being able to get coaching from trusted colleagues is really helpful when you're gearing up for an important conversation likely to be difficult with your manager. And importantly, let's extend those personal networks by reaching out and mentoring younger women, because we really are truly in this thing together. Well, as I look at this list of career management imperatives for women, and I think back over my own career, I'm struck by the notion that this is not really new information at all. Men have been using many of these career-enhancing tools for years. I think the real difference is that now more than ever before, corporate America is much more receptive to women who develop and use these skills. And that, I think, is really the crux of what has changed for women in management over the last 30 years. Through perseverance, changing demographics, advancements in the world in scientific psychology, and just good old hard work on the part of all the women before us, the door is now opening for women in management to compete without the encumbrances of the gender divide. So let's go for it.